first thing Saad Monroe noticed was the silence. Not the peaceful kind you find in a library, but the suffocating kind that precedes a gunshot. She had flown 14 hours from Houston, Texas, her grandmother's wooden cross still warm against her chest, for a job interview that had no right being this terrifying. The man across the table wasn't an HR manager. He was an accountant, but not the kind who wore bow ties and talked about deductions. This was Mr. Kwan, the financial fixer for the Bakwa Group, a name that meant white flour, but everyone in Seoul knew it was the petal that covered a very sharp knife. Sada's resume was a lie. Her presence here was a fluke. She was a 32-year-old freelance companion from a boutique agency in Austin that specialized in high-end, non-intimate corporate dates. Her Grenadian heritage gave her a face that stopped traffic. High cheekbones like volcanic ridges, skin the color of midnight rain, eyes the shade of warm honey, and a cascade of micro-braids intertwined with delicate gold cuffs that chimed softly when she moved. She was beautiful in a way that made people uncomfortable, too striking, too regal, too present. "Miss Monroe," Mr. Kwan said, sliding a tablet across the polished obsidian desk. On the screen was a photograph of a man. "Do you know who this is?" Saad looked. The man in the photo was leaning against a minimalist concrete wall, wearing a charcoal silk knit polo that clung to a lean, powerful frame. His hair was jet black, cut short on the sides and slightly tousled on top, as if he'd just run his hands through it. His face was unsettlingly handsome in a way that had nothing to do with boy bands. This was a face that had given orders that ended lives. His eyes were dark, almost black, but there was a glint in them, a predator's patience. He had a sharp jaw, a straight nose, and a mouth that looked like it had never smiled sincerely. "No," Saad said, her voice steady despite her heart hammering against her ribs. "But I'm guessing he's not a K-pop idol." Mr. Kwan did not laugh. "That is Shin Dae-hyun. He is the Juin, the master of the Bakwa Group. He controls every port from Busan to Incheon. He owns half of Gangnam's nightlife and all of its secrets." Saad leaned back, her vintage Yves Saint Laurent safari jacket, crisp khaki with brass buttons, rustling against the leather chair. "And you want me to what? Deliver him a pizza? He has a problem. Tomorrow night, he is finalizing a merger with a Russian consortium led by a man named Viktor Nazarov. Viktor is a connoisseur of authenticity. He despises paid actresses. He can smell a staged relationship from a kilometer away. But Viktor also has a weakness. He believes that a man who cannot secure a real, sophisticated, captivating woman cannot be trusted to secure a shipping route." Sada's honey eyes narrowed. "You want me to pretend to be his girlfriend?" "For one night," Mr. Kwan confirmed. "The contract is for 6 hours. You will be flown by private helicopter to a private estate in Yangpyeong. You will wear what we provide. You will speak only when spoken to. In exchange, you will receive $1 million, tax-free." The number hung in the air like a physical blow. $1 million. That was her mother's medical debt erased. That was her nephew's college tuition. That was freedom. "What's the unsettling part?" Saad asked because she was from Texas, and she knew that honey deals always had a sour center. Mr. Kwan slid a second document toward her. A non-disclosure agreement with a clause that made her blood run cold. In the event of breach, the contractor forfeits all rights to legal representation in the Republic of Korea and accepts the jurisdiction of the Bakwa Group's internal arbitration. Internal arbitration. That was Mafia speak for being buried in a concrete barrel. "If he doesn't like you," Mr. Kwan added quietly, "there is no breach. There is simply an inconvenience." Saad should have run. She should have walked out of that glass tower, hailed a taxi to Incheon, and never looked back. But she thought of her mother's hands, arthritic, swollen, and she picked up the pen. Saad being fitted in a plunging bronze metallic gown by Nancy Dojaka, her shoulders bare, her micro-braids pinned up with a single antique jade hairpin. She looks like a goddess of vengeance. The Yangpyeong estate, a brutalist mansion carved into a cliffside, overlooking a foggy valley. No river in sight, only pine trees and silence. Interior. A cavernous living room with a 20-foot ceiling, a fireplace large enough to roast a boar, and furniture made of smoked oak and black leather. The moment Saad stepped off the helicopter, she understood she had made a terrible mistake. The air was cold, but the man waiting for her was colder. Shin Dae-hyun stood on the helipad in a full-length wool cashmere coat, the color of dried blood, worn over a simple black turtleneck and tailored trousers. He wasn't large, but he occupied space like a gravitational field. His presence made the air thicker. He looked at her, not like a man looks at a woman, like a jeweler looks at a diamond, assessing flaws, cuts, potential. "You're tall," he said. His voice was low, with a gravelly texture, like stones grinding together. His English was flawless, accented with a sharp soul crispness. "You're short on compliments," Saad replied, because her mouth had always been faster than her survival instincts. Something flickered in Dae-hyun's eyes. Amusement? Annoyance? He turned without another word and walked inside, expecting her to follow like a well-trained pet. She didn't. She stood on the helipad for a full 10 seconds, letting the wind whip her bronze gown, asserting her own gravity. Then she walked, at her own pace. The dinner was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Viktor Nazarov was a bear of a man with a shaved head and a velvet smoking jacket, accompanied by his much younger wife, a brittle blonde named Katia who wore a feathered Mugler corset that looked like it was actively fighting her. Dae-hyun introduced Saad as Ms. Monroe, my companion. Not girlfriend, not partner, companion. The word was a warning to her and a test to Victor. Victor leaned in. "She is not Korean," he observed, as if Saad wasn't sitting right there. Before Dae-hyun could answer, Saad picked up her wine glass, a 2017 Chateau Margaux in a Zalto stem, and swirled it. "Neither is your Rolex," she said pleasantly. "But it's still a beautiful piece, isn't it?" The table went silent. Katia gasped. Victor blinked, then let out a booming laugh that shook the chandelier. "I like her," Victor roared, slamming his palm on the table. "Shin, where did you find this one?" Dae-hyun looked at Saad. For the first time, his mask cracked. There was genuine surprise there and something else, a wariness, as if he had just realized he had brought a wildfire into his house and expected it to stay in the fireplace. "She is unique," Dae-hyun said slowly, the word tasting unfamiliar in his mouth. The rest of the dinner was a chess match. Saad didn't sit silently. She asked Victor about his mother's dacha, complimented Katia's unusual eye makeup, a graphic liner that looked like a bird's wing, and told a completely fabricated story about growing up in Texas that involved armadillos and a runaway rodeo bull. Victor was enchanted. By the time the digestifs arrived, he was calling her Sajka and demanding she and Dae-hyun visit his villa in Cap Ferret. When the Russians finally departed in a convoy of black SUVs, Dae-hyun stood alone in the foyer, staring at Saad. The firelight caught the angles of his face, making him look less like a criminal and more like a fallen angel. "You lied," he said, "about the armadillo. They don't chase people." "You lied first," she shot back, stepping closer. Her Manolo Blahnik heels clicked against the marble like gunshots. "You told him I was your companion. I'm a hired prop. At least call me what I am." He moved then, faster than she expected. He didn't touch her, but he invaded her space, his chest inches from her bare shoulders. Up close, he smelled like cedar and smoke and something metallic, like ozone before a storm. "You are whatever I need you to be tonight," he murmured. "And tonight you were magnificent." The word landed like a slap. Magnificent. Not beautiful, not pretty. Magnificent. As if she were a cathedral or a natural disaster. "The contract says 6 hours," Saad whispered, refusing to step back. "Your time is almost up." Dae-hyun tilted his head. The predator was assessing her again. "I am extending it. Indefinitely." And before she could ask what that meant, 2 men in black suits appeared behind her, and the gilded cage slammed shut. A penthouse suite with no phone, silk pajamas by La Perla delivered daily, meals prepared by a silent chef. She is a prisoner. But she is a prisoner in a Dries Van Noten robe, and she refuses to cry. A private library in Dae-hyun's estate. Walls of rare books that have never been read. A fire crackles. Saad sits cross-legged on a velvet chaise, wearing a cream-colored Alaya knit dress that hugs her curves like a second skin. She is reading a worn paperback, Toni Morrison's Beloved, which she had smuggled in her luggage. 3 weeks. She had been a captive for 3 weeks. No violence, no chains. Just the silent, suffocating reality of being owned. Dae-hyun hadn't touched her. He hadn't even raised his voice. He simply orbited. He would appear at breakfast, sit across from her, and read the Financial Times. He would watch her from doorways. He had a habit of leaving things he thought she might like on her dresser. A first edition of Their Eyes Were Watching God, a bottle of tequila Clase Azul, because he'd noticed she liked the sound the ceramic made against the table. A cashmere throw in the exact shade of burnt orange. It was the kindness that terrified her most, because it meant he wasn't a monster. It meant he was a man, and men were much more dangerous. Tonight, he found her in the library. He was dressed down for once. A faded gray Henley and black joggers, his feet bare. He looked almost human. "You're not eating," he said, sitting on the opposite end of the chaise, a full 6 feet between them. "The chef is talented," Saad replied without looking up. "But I'm not a pet. You can't fatten me up for the slaughter." Dae-hyun was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "My father was a fisherman in Pohang. He died when I was 12. A loan shark broke his skull because he was late on a payment. I watched." Sada's eyes finally lifted from the page. This was not a story. This was a confession. "I built the Baekwa Group so no one would ever have the power to break my family again," he continued, his voice flat. "I am not a good man, Saad Monroe, but I am not a stupid one. I did not bring you here to hurt you. Then let me go." "I cannot." "Why?" He looked at her then, and the mask cracked entirely. Underneath was something raw and young and desperately lonely. "Because Viktor Nazarov is not my only enemy. 2 days ago, a rival faction, the Huang clan, discovered you are not my girlfriend. They have photographs of you entering Mr. Kwan's office. They know you are a contract hire. If they find you before I can secure a new deal, they'll use me against you," Saad finished, the horror dawning. "I'm not a prisoner. I'm a liability." Dae-hyun nodded once. "I am trying to protect you." Saad laughed. A harsh, broken sound. "Protect me? You bought me for $1 million to be your arm candy, and now you're surprised I have a pulse. You Mafia men are all the same. You think control is the same as care." She stood up, the Aliyah dress pooling around her thighs. She walked to the fireplace and stared into the flames. "My grandmother used to say that Grenadian women are born with salt water in their veins," she said softly. "We don't drown. We float. And we always find our way back to the sea." Dae-hyun rose slowly. He walked toward her, stopping just behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat of his body, but not touching. "What if I don't want you to go back to the sea?" he whispered. "What if I want you to stay in the storm with me?" She turned. They were inches apart. His dark eyes searched her face, looking for fear, for weakness, for the lie. She gave him none. "Then you'd better learn to swim, Mr. Shin." And for the first time in 23 years, Shin Dae-hyun smiled. It was small, crooked, and utterly devastating. Saad teaching Dae-hyun to play dominoes on a marble balcony. Dae-hyun teaching her a single phrase in Korean, "Nal Tianajima," "Don't leave me." A clandestine hand squeeze under a restaurant table during a tense meeting with the Huang clan. The romance is slow, reluctant, and volcanic. The penthouse 6 months later. It is no longer a cage. It is a home. Sada's things are everywhere. Her grandmother's cross on the nightstand, her collection of vintage silk scarves draped over lamps, a half-finished painting of a Caribbean sunset on an easel by the window. Dae-hyun is on a conference call in the next room, speaking rapid-fire Korean. His voice is sharp, angry. Saad listened through the door. She had learned enough Korean to understand a few words. Huang. Betrayal. Payment. When he hung up, she walked in. He was standing by the window, backlit by the neon chaos of Seoul at night. He wore a black Bottega Veneta suit, no tie, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone. He looked exhausted. "The Huang clan attacked one of our warehouses," he said without turning. 3 men are dead. They are demanding I hand you over as restitution." Sada's heart stopped. "Hand me over? They believe if they humiliate me by taking my woman, the other families will lose respect for me." He turned. His face was a mask of stone, but his hands were shaking. "I have spent my entire life building walls, and then you arrived, and you walked through every single one of them. cannot let them take you, Saad. I will burn this city to the ground first. She walked toward him, her bare feet silent on the heated floors. She was wearing a simple slip dress in deep burgundy silk, her hair loose, the gold cuffs catching the light. Then don't let them take me, she said. Let me help you. No. Dae-hyun. She cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. I am not a damsel. I am a woman from Texas with Grenadian roots. My ancestors survived hurricanes, colonization, and the Atlantic crossing. A few Korean gangsters are not going to be the thing that breaks me. He closed his eyes, leaning into her touch. For a moment, he was not the Jewin of the Baekwa group. He was just a man, terrified of losing the only good thing in his life. What do you propose? He asked. Saad smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was the smile of a woman who had spent 6 months learning the architecture of her captor's empire and had found all the secret doors. You said Victor Nazarov owes you a favor, she said. Call him. Tell him the Huang clan is trying to interfere with your shipping routes. Victor hates competition more than he hates bad wine. He'll send his men. Meanwhile, I'll meet with the Huang leader myself. Absolutely not. He won't hurt me. He wants you to suffer. Killing me would be too quick. He'll want to negotiate. That gives you time to surround the building. Dae-hyun stared at her. The predator was seeing his equal for the first time. You are insane, he whispered. You paid $1 million for insane, baby, she replied. Let's make it worth it. A warehouse at the edge of Incheon. Saad walks in alone, wearing a blood-red Saint Laurent power suit, her hair in a single braid. Huang's men part like the Red Sea. Huang himself, a weasel-faced man in an ill-fitting suit, sneers at her. The negotiation is tense, sharp, and full of double meanings. Saad plays the role of the scorned mistress, offering fake information about Dae-hyun's finances. While she talks, Victor's men slip in through the back. Dae-hyun's men cut the lights. In the chaos, Dae-hyun finds Saad in the dark, pulls her behind a shipping crate, and kisses her like she is oxygen. It is desperate, triumphant, and full of teeth. A beach in Jeju Island. Not the Han River. Not rain. Just blue sky, white sand, and the sound of waves. Saad and Dae-hyun sit on a blanket, watching the sunset. She wears a flowing Zimmermann kaftan in coral pink. He wears a simple white linen shirt, unbuttoned, his feet buried in the sand. The Baekwa group had been restructured. Legitimate businesses now outweighed the shadows. Huang was in prison. Victor was a partner, not a threat. And Shin Dae-hyun had done something he never thought possible. He had walked away. Not entirely. He still had power. But he no longer had to prove it. You're thinking too loud, Saad said, leaning her head on his shoulder. I'm thinking about the contract, he admitted. The $1 million. What about it? I never paid you. Saad laughed, the sound carried away by the ocean breeze. Yes, you did. Just not in cash. He turned to look at her. The sunset painted her skin in shades of gold and rose. She was, without question, the most magnificent thing he had ever seen. What did I pay you in? He asked, even though he knew the answer. Saad reached up and touched his face, tracing the line of his jaw. In freedom. You gave me a cage, but it was you who was trapped. You paid me in the only currency that matters, Dae-hyun. You paid me in your heart. He pulled her close, his forehead resting against hers. The waves crashed. The world continued spinning. Then the contract is fulfilled, he murmured. No, she whispered back, her smile wide and bright and full of Texas sunshine. The contract was the beginning. This is the lifetime warranty. 6 months had passed since the warehouse. 6 months of dismantling empires and building something fragile and new. The Baekwa group was now a ghost of its former self. Dae-hyun had done the unthinkable. He had gone legitimate. The shipping ports were now under a holding company managed by Mr. Kwon, who had been surprisingly loyal once the money was laundered through proper channels. The nightclubs had been sold to a Japanese conglomerate. The secrets had been archived, not destroyed. Dae-hyun was too smart for that. But they were locked away, in a vault that only he and now Saad knew existed. Stop staring, Saad said without looking at him. You'll burn a hole in my face. You're wearing my favorite color, he replied, setting the tablet aside. She glanced down at her silk blouse. A deep forest green, nearly black, from the row. This is green. On you, it's the color of trouble. Saad laughed, a low, rich sound that still made his chest ache after all these months. You're learning, Mr. Shin. Almost sounds like a compliment. It was a compliment. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his dark eyes fixed on her with an intensity that had never softened. Everything about you is a compliment to something I didn't know I was missing. The plane hummed. The flight attendant, a middle-aged Korean woman named Mrs. Park who had worked for Dae-hyun for 15 years and was the only staff member Saad actually trusted, discreetly retreated to the galley. Saad reached across the aisle and took his hand. His fingers were warm, calloused not from weapons but from the leather-bound journals he had taken to writing in every night. She had never asked what he wrote. Some boundaries, even in love, were sacred. Where are we going? She asked. You've been mysterious for 3 days. I don't like mysterious. Mysterious is how I ended up in a penthouse with no phone. Dae-hyun's mouth twitched. That had become his version of a grin. You have a phone now. 3 phones. And a tablet. And a laptop that probably has more encryption than the Pentagon. That's not the point. The point, he said, squeezing her hand, is that I have something to show you. Something I should have shown you the day we met. Sada's honey-colored eyes narrowed. If it's another contract, I'm using your expensive fountain pens to draw a mustache on your face while you sleep. He didn't answer. He just held her gaze, and for the first time since she'd known him, there was no calculation behind his eyes. No strategy. Just hope. What is this place? She whispered. An island off the coast of George, Dae-hyun said quietly. I bought it 3 years ago. I was going to build a private retreat. Somewhere no one could find me. Saad turned to him, her eyes wide. And now, he said, I want someone to find me. I want you to find me. Every day. A small, traditional Korean hanok, but reimagined. The structure is ancient wood and rice paper doors, but the interior is pure luxury. Heated floors, a soaking tub carved from a single piece of black granite, floor-to-ceiling windows that open onto a private beach. No cars. No noise. Just wind and water and sky. They landed on a private helipad carved into the hillside. Mrs. Park had stayed on the jet, and for the first time since the warehouse, Saad and Dae-hyun were completely alone. She walked barefoot through the hanok, her fingers trailing over silk cushions and lacquered wooden beams. Every detail was intentional. Every corner held a piece of him she had never seen before. A shelf of poetry in Korean and English. A record player with vinyls ranging from Billie Holiday to BTS. A small kitchen garden outside growing gochugaru peppers and something that smelled like rosemary. You grew herbs, she said, incredulous. I grew rosemary, he corrected from the doorway. Mrs. Park grew the rest. I have limitations. Saad turned to face him. He was leaning against the frame, arms crossed, wearing a simple cream linen button-down and gray trousers. No shoes. His hair was slightly damp from the ocean air. He looked, for the first time, like a man who had stopped running. Dae-hyun, she said slowly. Why did you bring me here? He pushed off from the doorframe and walked toward her. Each step was deliberate, like he was approaching something sacred. When he was close enough to touch, he stopped. Because I need to tell you something, he said. And I need you to hear it without walls, without contracts, without $1 million between us. Sada's heart began to pound. She had faced down gangsters and Russian oligarchs. She had negotiated her own safety in a warehouse lit only by the glow of a single fluorescent bulb. But this openness, this vulnerability on his face, terrified her more than any of it. Say it, she whispered. Dae-hyun reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box. Not the ostentatious kind from a luxury brand, but something old, wrapped in worn navy fabric, tied with a simple leather cord. My mother gave me this before she died, he said quietly. It was her mother's, and her mother's before that. It is not diamonds. It is not gold. It is. He untied the cord and opened the box. Inside was a ring, but not a ring she had ever seen before. The band was hammered silver, uneven and ancient, and set into it was a single polished stone the color of midnight, black obsidian, carved with a symbol she didn't recognize. Beside it, Nestled in the velvet was a matching bracelet, fine silver links with a small obsidian charm. In my family, Dae-hyun continued, his voice rough, we do not give rings to promise forever. We give obsidian, because obsidian is volcanic glass. It is made from fire and pressure and time. It is sharp enough to cut, but beautiful enough to keep. It is what you become when you survive what should have destroyed you. Sada's eyes burned. She did not cry. She had not cried since she was 16 years old and her father had walked out the door. But now, standing in this hammock on an island that existed only in his dreams, she felt the tears coming. Dae-hyun, I am not asking you to marry me, he said, cutting her off. Not yet. That word is too small for what I want. What I want is to give you the rest of my life. Every negotiation, every meal, every sunrise and every argument about whether you left the windows open during monsoon season. I want to be the man who makes you coffee and the man who makes you safe. I want to be yours, Saad Monroe. Not because I paid for you, not because I trapped you, but because you looked at a monster and saw a man, and you stayed. He took the bracelet from the box. His hands were trembling, the hands that had signed death warrants, that had held guns, that had built an empire from the ashes of a murdered fisherman. This bracelet, he said, is for now. It means you are choosing to stay. Tomorrow you can choose to leave. The jet will take you anywhere you want to go. There is a bank account in your name with $10 million. No conditions, no clauses, just freedom. He held out the bracelet. The obsidian caught the afternoon light, glinting like a tiny piece of night sky. But the ring, he continued, his voice barely a whisper. The ring is for when you know, when you are certain, when there is no contract between us except the one we write ourselves, every day, for the rest of our lives. Saad looked at the bracelet, then at the ring, then at the man. This impossible, terrifying, beautiful man who had bought her for an evening and lost himself for a lifetime. She reached out and took the bracelet from his palm. Her fingers brushed his, and she felt him shudder. Put it on me, she said. He did. His fingers were clumsy, fumbling with the tiny clasp. The man who had reorganized the criminal underworld of Seoul could not fasten a silver bracelet. Saad smiled, and this time, she did not stop the tears. They rolled down her cheeks, warm and saltwater bright, and she did not wipe them away. It's on, he said finally, stepping back to admire his work. The bracelet hung loose on her wrist, catching the light. Saad looked down at it. Then she looked at the box, still open in his hand, the ring winking up at her like a dare. Keep the ring safe, she said. I'm not ready yet. Dae-hyun nodded. He closed the box, his expression unreadable. I will wait. I know, she said. That's why I'm staying. On the private beach. Saad and Dae-hyun sit on a blanket woven from traditional Korean hemp, watching the sky turn from gold to magenta to deep violet. A small fire crackles beside them and 2 glasses of soju, the cheap kind because Saad had insisted, rest on a wooden tray. They had been sitting in silence for an hour. Not the uncomfortable silence of strangers, but the full silence of 2 people who had run out of things to prove. Dae-hyun was the first to speak. Tell me about Granada. Saad looked at him, surprised. He had never asked about her heritage before. He had seen it, acknowledged it, but never asked. My grandmother, Saad said slowly, was born on the island. She left when she was 18. Went to New York with $20 and a dream of becoming a nurse. She never made it to nursing school, but she raised 5 children in a 2-bedroom apartment in Brooklyn, and she never once complained. What was her name? Esperanza. That means hope in Spanish. She was Grenadian, but her mother was from Venezuela. The island is like that, a crossroads. African, Indian, European, Latin. Everyone's story is complicated. Dae-hyun nodded, staring into the fire. My father's name was Shin Chul-soo. He was not a good fisherman, but he was a good man. That was his only crime. Saad reached over and took his hand. The bracelet clinked softly against his watch. We are both made of complicated stories, she said. Yours is blood and ships. Mine is salt and survival. Maybe that's why we fit. Or maybe, Dae-hyun said, turning to look at her. We fit because we stopped trying to fit anywhere else. 3 months later. Same island. Same hammock. But now there are signs of life everywhere. Sada's painting studio in the West Wing. A garden exploding with flowers she had planted herself. A hammock strung between two pine trees. A small studio where Dae-hyun now works remotely, running his legitimate businesses through a video conferencing setup that Mrs. Park manages from the mainland. Saad stood in front of a full-length mirror in the bedroom. She was wearing a gown she had designed herself, an architectural masterpiece of black silk and ivory lace, with a fitted bodice that swept into a dramatic train. Her microbraids were pulled into a low chignon, woven with fresh white orchids. The gold cuffs were gone, replaced by the obsidian bracelet that had not left her wrist since the day he had put it there. In her hand, she held the velvet box. She had found it in his study 3 days ago, hidden behind a false panel in his desk. He had not hidden it well. Perhaps he had wanted her to find it. Perhaps he had wanted her to have the choice, always. She opened the box. The obsidian ring glittered in the morning light, the carved symbol catching the sun. She slipped it onto her finger. Fit perfectly. The beach. Dae-hyun stands at the water's edge, his back to her, watching the waves. He wears a simple black suit, no tie, his hands in his pockets. He does not know she is there until she speaks. I'm ready. He turned, and then he stopped breathing. Saad walked toward him across the sand, her gown trailing behind her like a river of night. The orchids in her hair swayed in the ocean breeze. The obsidian ring caught the light with every step. When she reached him, she held up her hand. The ring was unmistakable. How long have you had it on? He asked, his voice hoarse. 3 days, she admitted. I wanted to be sure. And are you? She reached up and touched his face. His jaw was rough with stubble, his eyes bright with something that looked like tears but could not be, because Shin Dae-hyun did not cry. I am sure, she said, that you are the most terrifying, frustrating, impossible man I have ever met. I am sure that you have done things I will never ask about and that you would burn the world down to keep me warm. I am sure that I am not afraid of your shadows because I have my own. And I am sure, she said, slipping the ring off her finger and holding it out to him, that I want you to put this on my hand, properly, with words, with promises, with no escape clauses. Dae-hyun took the ring. His hands were shaking again, violently this time. He looked at her, and the mask was gone, completely, finally, irrevocably. Saad Monroe, he said, his voice breaking. I have killed for you. I have bled for you. I have become a different man for you. And I would do it all again. Every terrible thing. Every sleepless night. Every moment of fear that you would wake up and see me for what I really am. Because you looked at a monster and you did not flinch. You looked at a monster and you loved him anyway. He took her left hand. I am not promising you easy. I am not promising you safe. I am promising you honest. I am promising you forever. From this beach. From this island. From this moment until the last wave crashes and the sun forgets to rise. He slid the ring onto her finger. Saad looked down at it. The obsidian was warm against her skin, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Now you, Dae-hyun said. He reached into his other pocket and pulled out a matching band, thicker, wider, without the symbol. I designed too. Saad laughed. A wet, joyful sound. She took the band and slid it onto his finger. It was cool and heavy, grounding. You are mine now, she said. Not because you bought me, not because you trapped me, but because you set me free, and I chose to come back. He pulled her into his arms. The gown crumpled between them. The orchids scattered into the sand. And Shin Dae-hyun kissed Saad Monroe like she was the first good thing that had ever happened to him, which she was. The sun sets over the ocean. The hammock glows in the distance. Saad and Dae-hyun walk along the water's edge, hand in hand, barefoot now, the train of her gown dragging through the surf. They are laughing. Actually laughing, two people who had survived their own wars and found each other in the rubble.
Hey loves, this story teaches us that sometimes the people who seem hardest to love are the ones most desperate to be loved truly. Thank you so much for watching. Kindly like and subscribe.